It's 6:30. Thank you very much for joining. Very important session of IAPC Academy. And after the inaugural lecture by Dr. Dev, I think we are back to the focused topics. And Arun, now you have a big responsibility because now onwards, your juniors, those who have finished MD palliative medicine, they will be talking about the focused topics of palliative medicine, so that everybody will have what is happening in the recent advances and what are the management evidence-based management on that particular topic. So the purpose of giving this topic to post-MD palliative medicine is just to recognize them that they exist, and we are fortunate now. The MDs, those are coming out from AIMS and Tata Memorial Hospital, and now from Gujarat also they will come, and subsequently from Manipal and SMS Medical College, and then DNB students will start coming. And already those who have passed out from AIMS and Tata Memorial Hospital, they have started spreading all over India. This is one example that Nandan, who is going to speak today, he has started practicing proper palliative care at Manipur. So we are so fortunate that at Manipur also there is a palliative care physician who can spread the concept of palliative medicine at far away place in India. So right now he is working as a senior resident at Chija Academic of Health Sciences, Imphal. I think it's a big academic institute of Imphal, where they have started concentrated efforts to start palliative medicine. He is also, he has become Joint Secretary of Palliative Care Society Imphal. This I was not knowing. And he has contributed as a faculty in several training sessions. There is no doubt about it. He has contributed in our sessions also. He has already published 7 papers. Several papers have been accepted for presentation. He has presented lot of in lot of national and international conference, and he is also a recipient of ICMR travel grant to present a poster at Harvard Medical Institute. So Nandan, I am very proud to introduce you, and Nandan is a first post MD, like जैसे अरुण और अनुजा famous हैं, वैसे ही Nandan and Puneet, they are the first MD palliative medicine from AIMS Delhi. So Nandan, you start your topic, and then Dr. Arun, your senior, will take up the question answer. All the audience, those who will listen to you, they will put the questions in the chat box, and Dr. Arun will decide that which question he wants to discuss. Okay, so go ahead, Nandan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Nandan, and today I'll be discussing about magnet spinal cord compression. And first of all, I would like to thank Sushma ma'am for starting this very wonderful academic program. And this is a very good platform for learning, new concepts or clear your doubts regarding various diseases. So I think I want this session to be a little bit interactive, so that you can clear your doubts, because the clearing doubts is very important. My job is to finish this lecture, but if you don't understand what I'm speaking, what I'm trying to teach you, then there is no point in taking these classes. So I want you to understand what I'm telling, because neurology is a very difficult subject, and sometimes you don't understand. Some people, they might understand, but some people, they will have difficulty in understanding. So the basic the content of the lecture would be giving you the basic anatomy of the magnetic spinal cord compression, the epidemiology, the pathophysiology, the clinical feature of patient presenting with magnetic spinal cord compression, and what are the investigation that has to be done, and what are the treatment modalities in this kind of cases. So it's an emergency. So let's discuss magnetic spinal cord compression with few cases. So the case number 1, Mrs. Suna, she's a 38-year-old female, and she's a known case of CF breast, diagnosed in January 2020. She received chemotherapy and surgery was done. She was doing fine, but recently, 20 days back, she developed swelling on her chest, followed by difficulty in breathing. She also complains of lower back pain, which started 7 days ago, and difficulty in walking, which started 3 days ago. So the patient has lower back pain, and there is difficulty in walking. And on examination, the power was decreased on hip flexion, and rest of the muscle power was normal, and the reflexes were normal. Knee reflex and ankle reflex were normal. And she had decreased touch sensation over the right upper medial thigh. So keep this case in mind, and let's see another case. See, same case, but the different presentation is different. In this case, the patient is having lower back pain, which started 15 days ago, and she has bilateral lower limb weakness, which started 5 days ago. And you can see that the power has decreased in all muscles like hip flexion or knee extension, knee flexion, and plantar flexion. And also she has decreased touch sensation below the umbilicus. So we'll try to understand the spinal cord anatomy with these two cases. So yeah, so from the cases you must have guessed that this is a case of magnetic spinal cord compression. So what is magnetic spinal cord compression? It's a spinal cord compression by malignancy. Like it can be intraspinal or intramedullary malignancy, or it can be a metastatic malignancy. Mostly, so if you can see that image above, you can see there is a dura and there is epidural space, there is spinal cord and the CSF in between. So any tumor which is present in inside the dura is called intramedullary tumor, and which is outside the epidural space is called extramedullary tumor. And the most common intramedullary tumors are like ependymoma, astrocytoma, or oligodendroglioma. So these are the tumor which develops from the supporting cells of the central nervous systems. So like ependymal cells or oligodendrocytes. And extradural tumor are most commonly 94% of the time the extradural tumor are the metastatic magnetic spinal cord compression. So, and also spinal cord compression can be throughout the spinal cord, or it can involve the conus medullaris. So if you can see the spine on the right side of the image, we can see there is a triangular conical tapering of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord ends at L1 vertebra, at the lower border of L1 vertebra. So you can see there is a conical structure on the right side. So that is called conus medullaris, conus part. So you saw that two cases. So let's discuss the anatomy with the help of that cases. So the first case, there was weakness on hip flexion, and the patient had decreased sensation over the upper thigh, right thigh, and over the medial side of the right thigh. So can anyone tell me what could be the possible reason for weakness on hip flexion? Any MD students? Any would like to guess? Because I think it will be very useful if you know this, or if you don't know this. You can unmute and you can answer.
There are many MD students. Anyone wants to speak? Krishnapriya, Karanveer. Maybe you understood, or you were not there in the first slide.
Or you can just guess what would be the level, so that you will understand what's going on. So because you can get this kind of patient, because the patient might complain you that I have complained on I have the weakness of hip flexion, like knee extension or knee flexion or dorsal plantar flexion, any kind of presentation. But you need to know what is the basic anatomy. So yeah, so let's discuss this case. So you can see this is the spinal cord, right? And there are vertebral body, and actually there is no pointer in this, that's why I can't explain properly. But anyways, there is a vertebral body. You can see the vertebral body, and there are spinal nerve root, there are ventral nerve root, and there are dorsal nerve root. So the ventral nerve root and the dorsal nerve root, they combine and they form spinal nerve root. And whenever there is a weakness of the lower motor neuron, there will be weakness of the individual muscle. And also the spinal nerve, they carry the motor fiber and also the sensory fiber. So in this case, you can see that the patient had a difficulty in hip flexion. So the hip flexion is done by the nerve root value of L2 and L3. So the most likely the compression would be L2 or L3 spinal root. So, but if you see the distribution of L2 vertebra, so first you need to understand what is lower motor and what is upper motor neuron. So in the right side of your image, you can see that there is a nerve, like the nerve coming from the cortex, and it is coming till the spinal cord, and it is connecting with the anterior horn cell. There is an anterior horn cell and there is a posterior horn cell. So anterior motor, there is anterior motor neuron, which is the starting point of the lower motor neuron, and it is attaching to the muscle. So lower motor is something that is from the anterior horn cell till the neuromuscular junction, is till the muscle. And upper motor neuron is something that is coming from the cortex till the lower motor neuron in the anterior horn cell. So so just think about.
And then you can use your cursor. You can use your cursor to show this thing.
I can,
Cursor will move.
it's not moving on the screen, ma'am.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead. No problem. Okay, sorry.
Okay, so so let's understand this upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron with an example. So if you are in some classroom and there are classroom and when there is HOD, everyone is very silent, right? When there is HOD, everyone is silent, and when the HOD is not there in the class, everyone starts like shouting or like talking. So it's like the same thing. So when there is upper motor neuron kind of lesion, the lower motor will be very like spastic. So when there is upper motor neuron, the tone of the muscle will increase, and when there is lower motor neuron lesion, the tone of the muscle will be decreased. And when there is upper motor neuron lesion, the tone, the reflex also, there will be hyperreflexia. And also when there is lower motor neuron, there will be decreased reflex. And the muscle, they'll be involving group of muscles, and in lower motor neuron, they'll be involving the particular nerve. So as I explained in that case, like sorry, okay. So as I explained in this case, so there was involvement of particular one nerve root. So that is something which is lower motor neuron lesion. So let's discuss the second case where the patient had weakness of bilateral lower limb. So in this case, there is also, as you can see, that the patient had complaint of decreased touch sensation below the umbilicus. So we need to know what is the dermatome level of T10 spinal cord. So if you just try to memorize this dermatome level, because this might be very useful, but you can't remember everything. But once you start practicing, once you start seeing the patient, that patient is complaining like sensory loss below the umbilicus, then you'll start knowing that the T10 level is what is corresponding to the umbilicus level. And if you, for your like reference, T4 level would be the level of nipple. So if there is any kind of, you have to like see the sensation of the whole body, and wherever that is ending. So you start with the lower limb and you go upward to check whether the sensory loss is there or not. So in this case, the patient complained of, so the patient was examined and there was a decreased touch sensation below the umbilicus. So the level of injury is at the level of T10 spinal cord. So whenever there is injury or spinal cord compression at the level of T10 or any level, there will be lower motor neuron weakness at that level, and also there will be upper motor neuron weakness at that level, and also all the lower below lesions, they will be having upper motor kind of lesion. So see this image. Can you see this cursor moving? Can anyone like respond?
Yes, we can see. Yeah, we can see.
So see, this is the spinal nerve. So if there is anterior horn cell, and from anterior horn cell, this spinal nerve goes and supplies to the muscle. So this is called lower motor neuron. And so whenever there is spinal cord compression, that will the tumor will be rising from this region. Mostly 94% of the time, the tumor will be in this region, the vertebra. So it will compress this anterior horn of the spinal cord. So when they'll compress this anterior horn of the spinal cord, there are many tracts like anterior corticospinal tract, or there are spinal thalamic tract. There are like extrapyramidal tracts. So these are the muscle, like these are the tracts which are supplying the muscles. So there will be bilateral weakness because, and at the same level, you can see that there are lower motor neuron also, there are upper motor neuron also. So at the same level, there will be upper motor neuron lesion and also lower motor neuron lesion. But if you see at the lower, below that level, the injury level, there will be only upper motor neuron, because the injury is only at this level. So there will be only upper motor neuron kind of lesion. So that's why the patient presented with bilateral lower limb weakness and also touch sensation below the umbilicus. I hope you understood this. So let's discuss this basic how many spinal knobs are there, how they emerge, what is the corresponding level, because sometimes this can be very confusing. So whenever you are in your ward and you are looking at some X-ray report or a PET CT report, and you see that the patient had a metastasis to T6 vertebra or T9 vertebra or T12 vertebra, and the patient is complaining of bilateral lower limb weakness. So you might be thinking that, yeah, so the patient is having metastasis to T9 vertebra, so the T9 spinal cord segment might be involved, but it's not the case. So just because there are like the vertebra is you can see the vertebra is continuing till like coccyx, and the spinal cord is ending at the level of T1 vertebra. This is the ending of the spinal cord, and this ending is called conus medullaris. So so just for your basic understanding, in cervical region, the spinal cord level is like almost similar. So if there is injury in the like C6 vertebra, it will injure the corresponding C6 level of the spinal cord. And in case of thoracic vertebra, so you have to go like if it is upper thoracic, like it is T6 and above, then the injury will be like you have to count like 2 level higher. And in case of lower thoracic, you have to count 2 to 3 level higher. So let's see an example. So in this case, if you see there is metastasis to T9 vertebra, so you can see that if you point like this, I hope you can see this. See the corresponding spinal segment is T11. So I hope you can see this. T11 is the spinal segment that is being injured. And if you look at the lower thoracic, I mean, that was the lower thoracic. But if you look at the lumbar, I mean, spinal nerves, there is a lumbar enlargement. So there are 5 lumbar nerves, but they are consolidated in a very small space. And if you can see, there are many nerves here, but they have so much of space, and there is so much of very less space in this area. So if there is any injury in the T11, T12, and T12 region, it will compress all the lumbar, spinal segments. And if there is like a metastasis to the L1 vertebra, it will compress this conus region. So whenever there is like metastasis to L1 vertebra, it will compress the this corresponding conus region. I hope you understand, because this is very important in the upcoming slides. So whenever there is compression of this region, conus medullaris region, this will give rise to conus medullaris syndrome. And as there are sacral nerve roots coming from this region, so the presentation will correspond according to that compression. And there are like S2, S3, S4, S5 spinal segments corresponding to this level. I hope you understand this. And now, so yeah, so we also need to understand, suppose just like in that above case, the patient had difficulty in hip flexion. So we guess that the lesion might be in the L2, L3 vertebra. So, but in that case, if you can see that the knee reflex was normal. So knee reflex is the root value of knee reflex is L3, L4 spinal root segment. So if L3 and L4 is normal, it means that we have L2 spinal segment injury. So yeah, but these things you have to remember which nerve root is associated with which kind of flexion, so that whenever patient is presenting, patient might just tell you that I have difficulty in walking, or difficulty in difficulty in doing anything. And so you have to do the testing. So the testing can be like lower limb testing, can be hip flexion, knee extension, knee flexion, or plantar flexion or plantar extension. And you need to know these nerve root values. So let's know something about conus medullaris and what is chorda equina. So you can see that there are various nerve roots that are coming out from this level. So you can see that there is no spinal cord in this region. So any kind of injury in this region from here, L2 vertebra up to the sacrum, is called chorda equina syndrome. So the presentation will be different in this case, and the presentation will be different in this kind of injury if the injury is in this conus medullaris region. So the vertebral level that you can see is that conus medullaris is corresponding to mostly this L1 vertebra, and chorda equina is from L2 to sacral area. So whenever there is injury to this conus region, you can see that this is a spinal cord, right? So spinal cord, there are various tracts ascending tracts and descending tracts. and there are upper motor nerve, and also there are lower motor nerve. So whenever there will be injury to this area, this conus area, there will be upper motor kind of lesion and lower motor neuron kind of lesion. So, but if you see this cauda equina, whenever there is metastasis or compression of this nerve, it will involve individual nerve. Individual nerve means there will be lower motor neuron kind of lesion. I hope you understand this difference. This is very important because the presentation will be in that case. Suppose some patient is presenting you with suppose L4 nerve root lesion. So there will be presentation according to that muscles involvement. But if there is someone who is presenting with conus medullary syndrome, there will be bilateral weakness, and there will be bilateral involvement of this like symmetrical involvement of muscles, and also there will be because this is a sacral region, so this supplies to the bladder. So you know that the parasympathetic supply of bladder and bowel is S2, S3, S4 spinal segment. So there will be early urinary and fecal incontinence in these cases, and in cauda equina, there is a very less chance that it will be in this segments will be involved. So there will be patchy kind of distribution in this case, and there will be symmetrical kind of weakness or involvement in this case. I hope you understand. And also there will be radicular pain. What do you mean by radicular pain? So radicular means like a nerve root. So this is a nerve root, and this is like the spinal segment. So whenever there will be compression to this region, there will be like there will be involvement of both the both the sides. And in this case, there will be compression of the nerve root. So the patient will complain you that I have pain in this region. It is like going from this region to this region. So there will be like very severe kind of pain in this kind of patient. So you can differentiate that where might be the lesion. And so let's study about intramedullary lesion and extramedullary lesion also. So I have already told you that intramedullary means something that is some tumor. 5% of the time, the patient might present you the incidence of malignant spinal cord compression is 5% in intramedullary kind of tumors. So the intramedullary tumors are something that arises from the glial cells, like ependymoma or oligodendroglioma, like that. So these tumors, they grow in this area. So this is the central cord of the spinal cord. And as you know that there are various tracts in this area. So the only tract that crosses from the one side to the other is spinothalamic tract, lateral spinothalamic tract, and it carries the sensation of pain and temperature. So whenever there is intramedullary tumor, that will compress this region, right? So slowly it will start increasing. So whenever there is compression of this region, you will compress the lateral spinothalamic tract. So whenever there is compression of lateral spinothalamic tract, the patient will complain of burning pain. So the initial presentation in this kind of cases will be burning pain. So whenever there is a patient complaining you that they have burning kind of pain, so you can think of this thing. And slowly, but you have to remember this thing also. This is the distribution of this sacral, lumbar, thoracic, and cervical region. So in posterior column, the distribution is from sacral to the cervical, and from in the corticospinal tract and lateral spinothalamic tract, the distribution is from C to S, or cervical to sacral. So you can remember that sacral is in the most medial, and in this case, sacral is lying most outer side, and C, both the cervical region in this case are nearer. Just to remember, just for your memory. And whenever there is involvement of this central region, it will slowly keep increasing, and it will come till this cervical region, but it will not involve this sacral region. So there will be sacral sparing, and also sorry, corticospinal tract sign will appear later, because corticospinal tract is a little bit lateral side, and it is situated in this region. So it will even if the tumor is enlarging, it will not compress this region. It will be a later sign. But in case of extramedullary, that is most common, like 94% of the time you will be having extramedullary kind of presentation in patient, because the metastasis is mostly 94% of the time the patient is metastasis in the vertebral body. So there will be radicular pain, because when, suppose, just imagine this is the tumor, and there are this is the dorsal nerve root, and this is the ventral nerve root. So whenever there is tumor in this area, it will compress the dorsal nerve root or the ventral nerve root. So there will be radicular kind of pain, and there will be early sacral loss, because when the tumor is here, there is sacral area in this area. So sacral muscular loss, cycle kind of distribution will be there in this case. And there will be, sorry, there will be early spastic weakness in this kind of lesion. So coming to epidemiology, the annual incidence of symptomatic, there was a study done, and in that study in the US, they saw that the annual incidence of symptomatic epidural spinal cord compression was approximately 3 to 5% among patients dying from cancer. And this is seen in almost 5 to 10% of the cancer patient. And the most common associated, there was a study done in US in 15,000 patients, and from 1998 to 2008, and they saw that the most common cancer associated with malignant spinal cord compression was lung cancer. The incidence was 25%, followed by prostate cancer, followed by multiple myeloma, and breast cancer 7%. And in case of children, the most common were sarcoma and neuroblastoma, followed by germ cell neoplasm and Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the median age at diagnosis was 40 to 65 years. So now coming to pathophysiology, because this understanding of this concept also will be very useful. So let's, as I already mentioned, that 94% of the time there will be like involvement of this vertebral body. You can see this is vertebral body, and there is metastasis, and the tumor is growing in this area. So it will, what it will do, it will not go in this area. It will try to go in the least resistance area, and it will try to encircle this kind of region. So there are epidural venous plexus. As you can see, venous plexus and arterial supply is there. Because the spinal cord is being, consider this is the posterior 1/3, and this is the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord region. So anterior spinal artery is supplying the posterior 2/3 of the spinal cord, and posterior spinal artery is supplying the 1/3 of the spinal cord. So whenever there is a whenever there is a tumor growing in this area, it will try to impinge on the epidural venous plexus, and this vein will be obstructed. So whenever there is obstruction of the vein, there will be vasogenic edema. So in this kind of cases, the steroid will work, because whenever there is edema, it will compress this area. It will compress the spinal cord, and if the edema is, or the tumor is growing in this area, it will impinge on the spinal nerve. So you will get a lower motor kind of feature if it is isolated in this area, and if the tumor is isolated in this area, this is the spinal cord. So if the spinal cord is being impinged or compression is in the spinal cord, there will be upper motor neuron kind of lesion. And at the same segment, there will be upper motor and lower motor, and below that lesion, there will be upper motor neuron kind of lesion. So, in this, so if you understand this, and then you'll know why we are using corticosteroid in this kind of patients. So as I already mentioned, that 70% of the time the metastasis in the thoracic vertebra, and 20% of the time it's in the lumbar vertebra, and 10% of the time it's in the cervical vertebra, and 50% of the time it can be mixed. The patient can have multiple metastasis in the thoracic or the lumbar vertebra. So 94% of the time you can see that the vertebral body is being involved. So there are multiple, like whenever there is you might have studied about osteolytic metastasis or osteoblastic metastasis. So what happens is that whenever there is osteolytic metastasis, there will be osteolytic kind of lesion. So slowly what will happen is that the tumor growth is there. The tumor will start secreting a lot of chemicals, and the osteoclast will start expressing more and more. So there will be more osteoclastic kind of activity, and the bone will be slowly starting to weaken, and there will be chances that the bone might fracture, and it might impinge on the spinal cord. So yeah, so if there is the tumor, which is compressing this anterior spinal artery, so you'll get an anterior cord syndrome, which is the infarction of this area, 2/3 of the area. So you know that the majority of the tracts are in this area. There is anterior corticospinal tract, there is lateral corticospinal tract, there is spinothalamic tract in this area. There are extrapyramidal tracts in this area. So if some patient is presenting you with acute kind of presentation, like bilateral lower limb weakness of 2 days or 3 days weakness, then you can think that there might be anterior cord syndrome, and this region of the spinal cord might have been involved. So I hope you understand the anatomy and the pathophysiology. Now let's see the basic clinical features. Now till now you must have understand that what kind of tracts and the areas of this spinal cord are being involved in malignant spinal cord compression. So the presentation will be according to that. According to the compression. So if this like corticospinal tracts are being compressed, then there will be like weakness of the lower limb. If this spinal thalamic tract is being involved, then there will be like touch sensation will be gone, the pain, temperature, everything will be gone. There will be, and also if there are extrapyramidal tracts being involved or spinocerebellar tracts being involved, so the presentation will be according to that. So the most common presentation being low back pain. It's like it's very common. And this is the first presentation, and it is seen in 80 to 95% of the patient, and it usually precedes other neurological symptoms by 6 to 8 weeks. This is very important because whenever there is some patient presenting you with lower back pain, it doesn't mean that there is compression. It doesn't mean that there will be epidural spinal cord compression. But you have to understand that that there might be chances that in next few weeks the patient might present with that that symptom. So you have to take care of that also. And the patient will complain you that epidural spinal cord compression, the pain is worst at night. This is actually in some studies they have mentioned that this is because of the diurnal variation of level of endogenous corticosteroid, and the patient may feel it depends on the pain may feel depends on the level of injury. So if it is in the thoracic region, the patient will complain of band like pain sensation around the chest. If it's in the lower region, then it will radiate to the lower limbs. So in a similar way, the weakness is very common. It's like the second most common symptom of spinal cord compression. Is present in 61 to 91% of the patient, and it is the earliest sign sometimes, and which occur before the sensory disturbances, and it tends to be symmetrical and bilateral lower limb kind of weakness. And if it is involving the cervical region or upper thoracic region, the upper limb weakness will be seen, and if it is involving the lumbar region or lower thoracic region, then the lower limbs weakness will be seen. And if in the similar cases, whenever there is compression of the spinal cord, this spinal thalamic tract and other tract sensory fibers will be affected, and they will be seeing sensory loss according to the compression. So I think this is very important, knowing the bladder anatomy. So this is a detrusor muscle. As you can see, this is a detrusor muscle. This is the external urethral sphincter. There is a sphincter and there is a detrusor. So there are two things that you have to understand. And the supply, I mean the receptor present in this detrusor muscle is important. There are M3 receptor. This is the cholinergic receptor. This is the sympathetic receptor, beta 3 receptor. So these are two receptors that is present in this detrusor muscle, and there are alpha 1 receptor in this sphincter. And you have to know the this nerve supply of the bladder. So as you can see, there is a parasympathetic involvement of the bladder, and the parasympathetic nerve is involving the detrusor muscle and the external urethral sphincter. So let's see, as I explained, as I already told you that whenever there is a upper motor neuron kind of lesion, the muscles being supplied by the lower motor neuron becomes hyperreflexive. Just think about that example that I explained you, that whenever there is HOD in the class, everyone in the class is silent. And when there is no HOD, there is everyone starts talking and everyone starts moving here and there. So it's similarly, I'll be explaining this that example. So just imagine that there is upper motor neuron kind of lesion in this case. So what will happen is that there is local reflex in this area. Normally what happens, let's see what normally happens is that whenever a person drinks water, the bladder slowly fills. And whenever there is filling, this will give information to the spinal cord or the central nervous system that the bladder is being filled. And the central nervous system will tell that, no, it's not filled till the required amount, let it fill. So slowly it will fill to the 2/3, and then the central nervous system will tell that evacuate the urine. So there will be voiding in that case. But what if there is lesion of the upper motor neuron lesion? What will happen is that there will be no control. What will happen is that whenever there is small kind of feeling, like, and then what will happen? It will activate this nerve, and it will go here, and there will be no like inhibitory interneurons coming from the upper motor neuron. So what will happen is that it will contract very fast. So there will be so much of contraction. So this kind of bladder is called neurogenic bladder, and this kind of contraction is called urge incontinence. So there will patient will complain of incontinence. So patient will have urge very very fast. After drinking, the patient will tell you, sir, मैंने पानी पिया था, 1-2 घंटे के बाद फिर से मेरे निकल गया. So you will understand that this is urge incontinence, and there is upper motor neuron kind of lesion. So so now you know the anatomy, and you know the receptor. what is happening is that this detrusor muscle is contracting very fast. So what you can do is that you can like inhibit this receptor. How will you inhibit this receptor? By giving anticholinergic. If you give anticholinergic like oxybutynin, solifenacin, derifenacin, this kind of this will block this receptor. So when this receptor is blocked, this detrusor muscle, it won't contract. So the symptoms of the patient will be relieved. So this is the upper motor neuron kind of lesion. Now let's see what is the lower motor neuron kind of lesion. So if there is lower motor neuron kind of lesion, then all the connection is gone, right? So all the connection is gone means whenever the patient is drinking water, there is no signal going to the like spinal cord or the central nervous system. So it will keep patient will keep drinking water and the bladder will keep filling. So there will be so much of pressure inside this bladder. So pressure will keep increasing. And just imagine your rooftop water tank. So when the tank is filled, there's nothing, it doesn't stop automatically, right? So when it fills, there will be so much of pressure. This is there are smooth muscles, so it will keep expanding. And when the pressure is like extreme, what it will do? It will try to open this external sphincter, and the urine will leak. So as you can see that there is overflowing of the bladder. So this kind of incontinence is called overflow incontinence. So I think you might have understand what is urge incontinence, what is overflow incontinence. This is very important because the presentation might be, the lesion might be different. You know that the lesion in case of overflow incontinence is lower motor, and in case of urge incontinence is upper motor neuron kind of lesion. And what kind of receptor is acting in this kind of cases, that also you know, and what kind of drug has to be given, that also you understood. Now coming to, this is the same thing that I explained. Also, this is the similar case in case of bowel. Bowel also being supplied by rectum and anal sphincter. They are being supplied by parasympathetic system. So whenever there is upper motor neuron kind of lesions, the same thing will happen. This will become very active, and there will be very difficult in controlling the bowel. But if there is lower motor neuron kind of lesion, there will be constipation because it will not move. This will not move, and there will be constipation. So this can be the presentation of the patient. So that's why knowing the anatomy is very important. Why the patient is presenting. So let's talk about investigation. The MRI is the gold standard. There is no doubt about that because it has a high specificity and sensitivity. So whenever you have doubt that the spinal cord might be compressed, go for MRI. MRI is the gold standard. So sometimes the MRI could not be clearly like showing the spinal cord compression. That in that case you have to you can go with CT myelography. But let's understand a situation where you are visiting a patient in the periphery where the patient is very poor, and the patient is like even at AIIMS also there is very difficulty in getting MRI done for the patient, and it's very costly and very time consuming sometimes. So you can go for plain X-ray also sometimes, because even if the compression is very much, that there will be obvious kind of this deformity in the vertebra. So you can know that there is something wrong with the vertebra and there might be spinal cord compression. So if you feel that the only one this vertebra is involved and the patient is requiring like vertebral surgery, then you can go for MRI. You can go with that. And sometimes bone scan also can be very useful. And but when you want to localize the bony destruction, CT scan is superior in that case, because MRI is something for soft tissues. So that will tell you about the spinal cord compressions. Now the grading is there is from you can do MRI and you can know the grading also. So there are like these are the grading, like grade 0, grade 1A, grade 1B, 1C, 2 and 3. So I'll just tell you the like clear brief grading. So if you see grade 1A, 1B and 1C, there is no spinal cord compression in this area. There will be a slight touching or abutting of the spinal cord, like as you can see in grade 1 kind of lesion. And in grade 2 and grade 3, there is spinal cord compression. In grade 2, it's not closely like encircling this spinal cord, but in grade 3, it will encircle the whole of the spinal cord. So this is the grading of the spinal cord according to the MRI. Now coming to the management. So management of spinal cord compression is not a single department job. You have to consult a lot of departments. So the job is like a team approach. You can't do it alone. You have to have neurosurgeon. You have to have radiation oncologist. You have to have pain physician, the psychologist, psychiatrist, intervention radiologist. So you have to take help of everyone. So coming to the treatment. So why is this malignant spinal cord compression detecting early is very important, because it has been seen that the patient who was non-ambulatory for longer than 48 hours before diagnosis are less likely to regain function with treatment than those who are diagnosed earlier. So someone is presenting with you after 48 hours and the patient is like paraplegic, and you can guess that the prognosis is very poor. That's why diagnosing early, the patient presenting early before 48 hours is very important, because then only the intervention will work. Otherwise, it's very difficult. So whenever you get this kind of patient, you have to do basic assessment for treatment. You have to do basic assessment, like someone who has whether the patient has good performance status. You can go for Karnofsky performance status scale or HUG scale, and you have to see whether the patient has a lot of systemic burden or not, or whether they're like the systemic disease is controlled or not, and what are the treatment options available. So we'll study this with the algorithm. This is the basic algorithm that is given, and so let's study this. So what you do is, first, whenever you encounter any patient, you do the performance status. If the performance status of the patient is less than 40 in KPS, the life expectancy is less than 2 months, it means that the patient is like the life expectancy is not good, and the intervention will not be effective in this kind of patient, because anyway the patient is going to die. So the goal of the care should be supportive care. And if the life expectancy is good, then you have to see whether the patient has any systemic disease or not, whether the systemic disease is controlled or not, and whether the systemic treatment or option are available or not. In any case, we have to use MNOP algorithm. So what is MNOP algorithm? In this, we have to first check about the mechanical stability of the spine. So let's think about this in a different way. So there is a spine, there is a like vertebra, and there is a spinal cord. So if there is a spinal instability, so if the vertebra is unstable, so even if you do anything, you give corticosteroid or you do anything, it will not affect, because if the vertebra is compressing the spinal cord, nothing will work. Even radiotherapy, it will not work, because the spinal cord will be compressed. So first, what you have to check is the vertebral stability is there or not. And after that, you have to see whether the neurological problem is, how much is the neurological problem, what is the oncological status of the patient, and what are the preferred treatment of this patient. So in this algorithm, first you have to check whether the spine is stable or unstable. If the spine is unstable, you have to go for surgery, because without stabilization of the vertebra, you can't do anything. There will not be any improvement in the patient, because the vertebra will be impinging on the, compressing on the spinal cord. So second case can be that the vertebra is stable. So in that case, what you can do is, vertebra is stable, and you have to see whether the neurological problem, how much is the neurological problem after that. So in these cases, you have to go for radiotherapy and corticosteroid, and you have to advise for brace or vertebroplasty. And also, if there is some like histology is responsive for chemotherapy or radiotherapy, then you have to consult radiation oncologist or the medical oncologist accordingly. So the treatment option can be broadly divided into two kind of treatment. One is supportive and preventive care, and one is selection of the definitive treatment. So in supportive and preventive care, you can use steroid. Pain management is there, venous embolism prophylaxis, and urinary retention and constipation treatment. And in case of definitive treatment, you can go for radiotherapy or surgical decompression or chemotherapy. So let's discuss three cases related to use of corticosteroid, because sometimes you might not have to use corticosteroid. So let's see this case, the same case. Mrs. Suna, 38-year-old female, known case of CA breast, diagnosed in January 2020. She received chemotherapy and surgery was done. She was doing fine, but recently she developed swelling on her chest, and gradually she started having difficulty in breathing. She also complains of lower back pain, which started 15 days ago, and weakness of both lower limb, which started 7 days ago, along with urinary incontinence and constipation. And the PET-CT report shows multiple lung and vertebral metastasis. And you saw that the patient is on 91%. Sorry, the saturation is 91%, and she's on 10 liters of oxygen. So so you can see that the patient is having you can know that the patient is having poor prognosis, and the patient might have only few days, maybe 1 day or 2 days or less than a week, because with oxygen also her saturation is not being maintained. So in that case, you know that this is a case of malignant spinal cord compression. It doesn't mean that you have to give corticosteroid in this case. The plan should be to make an end of life care plan and to relieve the suffering, like manage pain, dyspnea, bowel and bladder condition. Even if you give corticosteroid, it might be helpful for some other reason, but it won't be helpful for malignant spinal cord compression. So you need to know when to give, when not to give. So let's see another case. So same patient, but she's now complaining of lower back pain since last 3 days with NRS of 3/10. So there is only lower back pain, and the patient has NRS of 3/10. This is a mild kind of pain. On examination, the power is normal. Sensation intact, the reflexes are normal. There is no bladder and bowel involvement. So there is no knob compression kind of thing in this case. But the patient is complaining of lower back pain. So you might be thinking that someone presenting with lower back pain, we have to give steroid as soon as a patient is coming. You have to give steroid. It's not like that. It could be the other reason also, because there is no compression. It means that the steroid is not going to work. So the only pain management could be the option in this kind of case, because it could be just a bony pain or the muscular kind of pain in the lower back. So, but yeah, but if the patient is CF breast, there could be osteolytic kind of lesion in the vertebra. So there could be chances that the calcium level might be raised in this kind of patient. So, and because of the osteolytic lesion, the vertebra might be very weak. So you have to review whether the patient has to be started on bisphosphonate or not. So you can do that and get an X-ray done. So if you have doubt, get an X-ray done, plain X-ray done. If you think that there is some kind of vertebral instability, you can get an X-ray done. If you have some kind of doubt, then you go for MRI. That yeah, you have to do something for this patient, then you go for MRI. But you have to counsel the patient regarding the possible nerve compression and inform immediately. You have to immediately inform the patient that yeah, there is chances that this bone might break. There are chances that tumor might impinge on the spinal cord. This is very important, because as soon as the patient complains of any kind of sensory or motor kind of weakness, they will report to you. And as I already mentioned, that the golden period of like treatment is 48 hours. So if the patient presents with ambulatory kind of situation in spinal cord compression, then the chances of the treatment is good, prognosis is good. And let's see another case. It's the same patient, but this time the patient is having lower back pain with bilateral lower limb weakness. There is like power loss of power in like slight weakness in all the lower limb muscles. And so so this is the kind of now we can think that there is magnetic spinal cord compression. So in this case you can go for MRI, because now you have to treat this patient, because the patient is presenting within last 12 hours. So you have to go for steroid. Now let's see what are the various guidelines or reviews done for magnetic spinal cord compression. Sorry, steroid. So there was a study which was a systematic review. They studied like 309 papers, and they studied, like they compared the like the dosing of the steroid, like high dosing, whether the high dosing of the steroid is useful or the lower dosing of the steroid. High dosing means 96 mg of the corticosteroid and versus 16 mg of the corticosteroid. And what they found is that when the patient was on 96 mg of corticosteroid, the patient had a lot of complications. So they suggested that 16 mg of the corticosteroid should be used in patient, because the efficacy of both the doses were similar, but the side effects in 96 mg of corticosteroid was more. So there are only 3 clinical trials done so far, like the proper clinical trial done. There are many other studies, but proper clinical trial done, and which also suggests that 96 mg of the dexamethasone has not good outcome, and so there is not good outcome. So what we can follow is that this is a guideline given in the NHS. So this is generally like followed in India and everywhere. Whenever the patient is complaining, presenting with spinal cord compression, what you can do is you can start with 16 mg of dexamethasone and daily dose, and you can taper it slowly. And also you have to document indication of corticosteroid on the patient. And these are like good practicing thing. So you have to indicate that we have started the patient on corticosteroid, and you have to indicate how long the steroid has to be used, how to taper the dose. Now, sometimes what happens that you know that you have to start corticosteroid, so you'll prescribe corticosteroid to the patient, but patient won't know when to taper, right? So you have started on 16 mg, the patient will keep taking 16 mg for 1 or 2 months. So that might happen, and there is a lot of side effect of corticosteroid. It's a very good drug, but there are side effects with this drug, and also there are gastritis associated with this patient. So you have to start PPI prophylactically, and also you have to monitor for this kind of illnesses like diabetes or epigastric pain or something, psychosis kind of thing. So you have to check with this thing also. So now, yes, there could be one situation where you have to use a steroid immediately, and the patient is planned for surgery or radiotherapy. In that case, the dosing of the steroid is the same. The 16 mg, you have to start with 16 mg. But the twist is here that you have to continue the 16 mg daily for the patient awaiting for surgery or radiotherapy for MSCC. So you have to start the dosing of 16 mg and then continue till the patient receives radiotherapy, and then you can, once the radiotherapy is done, it means that the tumor compression is gone, or the surgery is done, means that the compression is gone. So there is then slowly you can taper the corticosteroid in next 5 to 7 days. Suppose the patient is deteriorating even after this treatment, then you can reconsider of increasing the dose in this time. Anytime, whenever there is neurological dysfunction, you can increase the dose. You can reconsider the dose. So the patient will complain of pain, and you have to manage the pain according to the WHO pain ladder. And if the patient is having severe pain, you can titrate with an IV morphine or fentanyl, and then convert to oral morphine or fentanyl patch. And you can also start the patient on like neuropathic pain adjuvants like gabapentin, pregabalin, amitriptyline, and also for bony pain, you can start them on NSAIDs or zoledronic acid. This is a bisphosphonates, can be used to I'll be discussing about bisphosphonates in the later next slides. So, and other therapies like steroids and radiotherapy can be used. But managing pain has to be always holistic, because you cannot just think about managing pain in a physical pain. You have to think about psychological, social, and spiritual, and you have to manage accordingly. So there was a study done in almost 314 patients to see whether the patient was they were screened for like DVT before spinal surgery. The patient were spinal cord like malignant spinal cord compression patient, and they were screened for a DVT. So interestingly, 10% of the patient who were screened for before the surgery, they were screened, 10% of the patient they had DVT. So now you can think that 10% is a big chunk of patient, right? So you can't just take risks with 10% of the patient. So it might be you might be facing with this kind of situation also. So it has been advised that you can start them on short-term prophylactic venous thromboembolism prophylaxis like unfractionated heparin or fondaparinux. And if these drugs are contraindicated in this patient, then this patient can be started prophylactically on pneumatic venous compression devices or graduated compression stocking, so that we can prevent some venous thromboembolism. So yeah, so now, yeah, so I have already explained the anatomy, what are the nerve like supply of bowel and bladder. So you will get if there is upper motor neuron kind of lesion, there will be hyperreflexia, and also there can be retention, and if there is lower motor neuron kind of lesion, there will be fecal incontinence. So that you understood. So whenever there is hyperreflexia, it means that the bowel is like there is so much of movement in the bowel. So you want to give something like is bulking kind of agent, and whenever there is retention, you have to give something like osmotic agent or motility agent like Senna. So you can act accordingly. Whenever there is bladder infection, I have already explained, whenever there is upper motor neuron kind of lesion, there will be urge incontinence. So there will be hyperreflexia. So M3 is the receptor, cholinergic receptor, M3 is the receptor. So you have to give anticholinergics like oxybutynin or sorafenacin or dolafenacin, like that. And if there is flaccid, the sphincter is flaccid, then you can use catheter. You can use catheter in both of the cases. I think this is very important. You can teach the patient for intermittent self-catheterization also. Coming to the physiotherapy part, I think this is also very important, because whenever the patient is presenting with any kind of spinal instability, this is also kind of a very urgent kind of advice that we can give. Then you can refer the patient to a physiotherapist who will advise for these braces. This is the neck braces. This is Philadelphia collar. This is the Somi brace, and this is also the Taylor's brace. So even if you, whenever you are, suppose you don't have the facility of referring the patient to physiotherapist, then you can advise this kind of braces, because this is also important. Because if you think that the spine is unstable, and if you don't advise this, the spine might break and it will compress, and there will be so much of severe complication in this kind of patient. Also, if the patient is like bedridden, then you have to always keep special attention to prevent pressure ulcer, because this can be very devastating for the patient. So this kind of devices has to be considered in this kind of patient. So now coming to the definitive treatment. Definitive treatment is like chemotherapy, surgery, or radiotherapy. So as I've already mentioned that before surgery, you have to see whether the spine is stable or not. This is very important, and you have to see whether the patient's prognosis is poor, or patient's prognosis is good or not. How much is the life expectancy? So there are two things that you have to understand. One is spinal stability, and another thing is the prognosis of the patient. So for spinal stability, yeah, this is the spinal instability score. This is SINS. So in this, there are various scoring. I'm not going to go into the details, but if the score is 1 to 6, it is stable, and if the score is between 7 to 12, the patient is having potentially unstable spine, and if the score is 13 to 18, there will be unstable spine. So you can use this tool to know whether the spine is stable or not, and also you can use Tokuhashi scoring to know whether the patient has what is the prognosis of the patient. So if the total score is 0 to 8, the patient is having less than 6 months of prognosis. If the scoring is 9 to 11, the patient is having more than 6 months of prognosis. So now you know that you have used these two scores, and you know that the prognosis of the patient is good, and the spine is stable. So you have two criteria. So what you do is, and you know that there is vertebral metastasis. What you do, first thing you have to do is you have to stabilize the patient, stabilize the spine. So you discuss the case with the neurosurgeon, and if the patient is fit for surgery, and the patient has a prognosis of more than 6 months, and the patient has one or more of the following, like paraplegia less than 48 hours, and the patient has single level of compression, and that patient is unlikely to be benefited by the radiotherapy because the patient has unstable spine, or there is compression from intraspinal bony fragment, or a collapsed vertebra. So whenever there is collapsed vertebra, nothing will work. Even if you give radiotherapy, corticosteroid, whatever you do, nothing is going to work. You have to go for surgery. And there is deteriorating neurological function, and there is pain despite radiotherapy or maximum radiotherapy already received. So in this kind of cases, you have to go for surgery. So this is very simple, I think. So you have to look for at first you have to see whether the spine is stable or not, and what is the prognosis of the patient. So now coming to radiotherapy. So if the patient is who do not meet the criteria of surgery, now you know that the patient is not fit for surgery, and the cancer diagnosis is established, and the patient is radiosensitive, tumors are radiosensitive, then this kind of patient can be taken up for radiotherapy. And generally what they do is they give 5 fraction of radiotherapy. This is the dose, and in case of poor prognosis, they give 8 Gui of single fraction. So this is the so coming to contraindication, when not to do radiotherapy. If there is no histological diagnosis of the cancer patient, and there is the cancer is radio resistant, and there is vertebral displacement or spinal instability, and the condition of the patient is very poor, and previous RT to the same spinal side, in these cases you will not go for radiotherapy. So there are intervention radiology procedure also. So in this kind of intervention radiology procedure can be done by neurosurgeon or radiology intervention radiologist. So in this case, suppose the patient is not fit for open surgery. So in this case, what they do is, so they'll put cement in this area. So there is decompression, there is a vertebral recompression. So what they will do, they'll put there are two kind of process that they use. There is vertebroplasty and kyphoplasty. In this both the cases, they are using cement, and they'll put cement, and the stability of the spine will be maintained. So this is the intervention radiology procedure that they do. Also, we need to know what is bisphosphonate and denosumab. So how these drugs are acting, because as I already mentioned you that there are osteoclastic kind of activity going on in the bone. So we need to know what is osteoclast, how this drug act on the osteoclast. So there are nitrogenous based bisphosphonate and non-nitrogenous based bisphosphonate. What nitrogenous based bisphosphonate do, they inhibit the farnesyl pyrophosphate enzyme synthase enzyme. So what basically this is the pathway of cholesterol synthesis, and also this pathway leads to the osteoclast survival. So if this drug act on this enzyme, what will happen is that the osteoclast will not survive. There will be apoptosis of the osteoclast, and if you inhibit the osteoclast, then there will be no osteolytic lesion, and if there is no osteoclastic lesion, osteoclastic activity, then the spine, the bone will be stable. And also denosumab is there. What denosumab will do, they will bind to the rank receptor, and what it will do, it will inhibit the conversion of rank to rank, and it will inhibit the conversion of pre-osteoclast to osteoclast. So it will inhibit the maturation of the osteoclast. So both the cases you can see that they are inhibiting the osteoclast, but the difference is that this is very costly. Denosumab is very costly, and this is generally what we use. So whenever you think that the patient might be having osteoclastic activity because of the tumors that you know, then you can start them with bisphosphonate, because if the spine is very weak, there will be chances that there will be vertebral collapse and the spinal cord will be compressed. So this kind of patient can be benefited with these drugs. Now coming to chemotherapy, if the tumors are chemosensitive, then you can go for medical oncologist referral, and they will start them with this kind of drugs. And so yeah, this kind of patient, they have so much of psychological concerns. You can't just leave this kind of domain. They have so much of worry, because you can't imagine how the patient feels. Their only concern will be that, sir, mujhe please मैं क्या चल सकता हूँ नहीं चल सकता हूँ. There will be always this concern that can they walk or not. So this is a very big like issue in this kind of patients. There will be worry about mobility. There will be limitation of social life, increased burden on caregiver. There will be loss of job. So much of issues. So you have to take care of this kind of issues also. So coming to prognosis. This kind of the prognosis basically depends on the radiation sensitivity and pre-treatment mobility.
Nandan, sorry to interrupt you. You have to wind up because time is over. There are a lot of questions.
Last
I
time.
know you have done so well. Beautifully, you have explained everything. But we have to keep the timing. So please wind up. So with the people, Arun can take 1 or 2 questions. Okay.
Sure,
go ahead. Okay.
Thank you. So prognosis, you have to understand the prognosis of this kind of patient. So suppose you have it has been seen that 67 to 82% of the ambulatory patient with radiotherapy remains ambulatory, and patients with paraparesis do better than those who are paraplegic. And if the patient is having loss of sphincter function, that is a very bad prognostic sign. And the median survival in this kind of patient is only 6 months. And also there is 20% chance that this patient might have recurrence, because once there is one metastasis, there are chances that after 1 month there will be multiple metastases, there will be multiple problems. And for those who do not recover mobility after treatment, the median survival is only 1 to 3 months. And for those who is able to walk, the median survival is 5 to 8 months. So this kind of data is very important. How you have to approach, how do you have to counsel the patient, like it is going to work or not, because you have to be very factual when you are dealing with the patient. So let's wind up with this case with a last case. So how you approach a case. So this is a 64-year-old male from UP, known case of CL lung post chemotherapy, presented with paraplegia of 24-hour duration and lower back pain with urinary incontinence and constipation. MRI was done with unstable spine with single level of compression. So you have seen that there is a paraplegia of 24-hour duration and there is single level of compression. So what you do is, first of all, whenever you encounter this kind of patient, you know that there is spinal cord compression, and you start them with immediately with steroid. For pain, you have to go for Revolution pain ladder. For bladder, you catheterize the patient, take a physiotherapist opinion, stabilize the spine, take the review whether you have to use heparin or not, take a neurosurgery opinion, and make a neurological bowel management plan. If fit for surgery, then prepare for the patient for the surgery, and followed by radiotherapy. See, there are multiple departments involved whenever we are managing this kind of patient. And so prophylactic counseling is very important. This is the most important thing that I want to emphasize, because this will give you a very like the patient will present you at the earliest, and you have to know the anatomy. We have to know when to use dexamethasone. You have to know how to use this MNOP management protocol, and you have to know when to use when to refer for surgery or radiotherapy. And yeah, so I would like to say a few words before I finish. That I hope you understood a lot of anatomy. I know this is very confusing sometimes. So what you can do is just try to take up a patient, and suppose the patient is complaining you with some kind of weakness. Try to correlate where the vertebra might have been involved. What is the corresponding level of spinal cord that might have been like involved before reviewing any MRI or CT scan, so that your knowledge will be increasing slowly. And I think this is very important for MD student, because a lot of questions that I have discussed here will be asked in the MD exam, like cauda equina syndrome or Connors Maitland syndrome, urge incontinence, overflow incontinence, what is upper motor, what is lower motor neuron, what is all these kind of things. So as Sushma ma'am always like taught us that आज कुछ ऐसा कुछ सीखो जिससे कि खुद को मजा आए. So I hope that you have learned something today, that you will feel very good before you sleep. You will feel that I have learned something. Thank you.
Okay, Nandan, 1 or 2 questions.
Yes.
Are you ready to take 1 or 2 questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
go ahead.
First question is, what do you think? Prolonged catheterization is better than clean intermittent catheterization. Which one do you think is better? You keep the catheter versus the patient does it intermittently.
Yes, sir. So So you have to see, first of all, you have to, that patient might present you with all these kind of symptoms. And you know that whenever there is long-term catheter being used in some kind of patient, then there will be like UTI kind of symptom can be there. It depends on whether you are using silicone catheter or you are using the other catheter. And when was intermittent catheterization, you have to teach the patient. Sometimes they won't know, because most of the patient that you visit, they are not educated and they might not comply with the instruction that you give. So in this kind of patient, I think the silicone catheter can be useful. But if the patient can be taught, and the patient can be like, if some like home care nurses or like home care team are regularly visiting, then they can be advised for intermittent catheterization also.
Thank you. There are many comments congratulating you for bringing out the evidence and for explaining the details.
Thank you, sir.
And there is one single last question. Just do you have any experience of nerve conduction studies being done in patients who have cord compression?
Yes, sir. This was a study that was being done under Sushma ma'am. I was a senior research fellow at AIIMS. So we did nerve conduction studies in this kind of patient. I did a lot of patient, but the thing is that it's very like painful. So so I'll just give one very practical example why nerve conduction velocity is important. But this is not important in this kind of patient. So if you have like other kind of patient. So suppose there is a peripheral neuropathy kind of patient. Suppose the patient is having diabetes. In this kind of cases, nerve condition studies can be important, because you have to know whether the nerve is improving or not. And also when you are giving some kind of therapy in this kind of patient also, then you can use nerve conduction velocity to check whether the nerve is improving or not. I don't know, but I won't advise in going for nerve conduction. That is only for like experimental kind of studies.
Thank you. Thank you, Nandan. No further question, and thank you very much for your presentation. Sushma madam will say something at the end.
Yes, sir. Nandan, this was a super excellent presentation. I'm really proud of you. So before we wind up, I just want to say one. I want to ask Krishna Priya. She has done the total pattern of patients present with the spinal cord presented with the spinal cord compression in 6 months at IRCH. So just Krishna Priya, in 2 minutes, just highlight your findings so that people will know that what is happening in IRCH is happening all over India. So highlight your important parameters, please.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. My title of the study was Pattern of Patients Presenting with Metastatic Spinal Cord Compression to IRCH, to our palliative care unit. I saw a total number of 52 patients who presented to IRCH as well as NCA. And I could observe that the maximum number of patients presented with metastatic spinal cord compression was CA breast, followed by CA cervix, followed by CA prostate. The level of compression was, most of the patients were dorso-lumbar region, that is from T12 to L3. And the average time of presentation was 2 weeks. And only one patient out of 52 presented less than 48 hours. That's a golden hour of metastatic spinal cord compression. Only one patient presented. And I evaluated the pain. The neurological examination was done. The rates risk score was used to evaluate the survival. And for evaluating the functional status, I used EORTC BM22 and ECOG. And the investigations presented that we could go ahead with was MRI. And in 5 patients, we could do MRI. And as MRI machine was not in our IRCH, so most of the patients, we depended on the CT and PET scan to evaluate the level of compression and the extent of compression. And almost all the patients presented with, that is 52 patients presented with lower backache radiating to bilateral lower limb, 25 patients presented with motor loss, 3 patients had sensory loss, and bladder incontinence was present in 12 patients. So the treatments that we gave was a combination that which included high dose DEXA, radiotherapy, counseling, physiotherapy, and rehabilitation from our side. So we could give radiotherapy, eliminating the contraindications for RT. We could give radiotherapy to 30 patients. 33 patients we could start on high dose DEXA. And we could see that the pain recovery and pain also we managed with opioids. And we could see that the pain recovery was present in all the patients. The NRS was 3, less than 3 in all the patients after proper treatment. And we could see that there was a gain in motor power in 3 patients. That may be due to the decrease in the pain or due to the improvement due to DEXA or radiotherapy. And we could not evaluate there was no gain in bladder habit for any of the patients or in our setup.
Thank you, KP. Thank you
you,
very
ma'am.
much.
Thank
This
you.
was just an overview for everyone that this is the way golden hours. Hardly any patient present in the hospital. So this is important that while you are examining any CA breast, CA prostate, CA lung patient, you have to explain them that if you are having any kind of a back pain, you should present and you should tell, you should go to your doctor, and doctor has a responsibility to pick up that patient immediately. At least plain simple X-ray spine will be important so that you will have an idea that something is happening in the vertebra. So this golden hours will be will not lost. So you can see that out of 52 patients, only one patient had full recovery. Few patients were relieved from pain. So this is very important. I just wanted to explain you that how important is to pick up the patient in golden hours. So thank you very much, Nandan, for an excellent presentation. It was so good. It was so very good.
Yeah.
And I request all the residents, please present like this all the time, but be aware of the timing so that we can discuss so many things. And I'm really sorry to take your 11 or 12 minutes extra for the first lecture, but it was, everything was so important. Nandan was explaining so well that I was not feel like, I don't feel like interrupting him. That's why it took so much of time. Thank you, Nandan. And thank you, Arun. Thank you, Nisha and Archana, for keeping everybody on track. And we will see you on next Monday at 6:30 sharp with another resident from TMH or AIMS, whosoever will be. Thank you, Nandan. Thank you very much. And we will see you next Monday. Thanks a lot.